IGNC celebrates the artistic, literary, and scholarly journey of the great Indologist Anandacoomaraswamy. IGNC had the distinction of acquiring the Coomaraswamy collection from his legal heir, P. Ramaswamy, in 1995 and 2008. The collection mostly represents diverse forms of visual art expression and encompasses modern art, including paintings, Rajput painting, Pahari paintings, Bengal School of Art, all the painters, Nandlal Bose, Jemni Roy, Abni Babu, Surendranath, K. Venkatappa, and many more. We have also sculpture, photographs, rubbings, books, correspondence, slides, etc. Who was the first to differentiate between Rajput painting and Mughal painting? Recently, IGNCA archive acquired the Mulk Raj collection. While going through the papers, I found one of his unpublished articles. I believe it is not published. Some words by way of homage to Anandacoomaraswamy. Mulk Raj Anand mentioned, I quote, "I prepared under his guidance my book, The Hindu View of Art, published in 1933, of which the theme was given to me by Coomaraswamy himself from his own 2 essays of the dance of Shiva. And I imbibed from his writing the urge to return to the native country for the various pilgrimages, as well as in some other parts of Africa, Asia, Europe. I have made to almost every shrine our vast country," unquote. Furthermore, I quote what he says: "Coomaraswamy, as a theoretician, was one of the small band of world philosophers of aesthetics, Benedetto Croce, Jacquin Martin, George Sanatana, Eric Grill, and Okura, who saw the danger implicit in the Western industrial civilization, who warned the intelligentsia about the inevitable breakdown of harmony in technology run mad world disorder, and who asked for the return man-to-man integral order," unquote. Coomaraswamy believed that the origin of religion and culture is the same faith. No culture can emerge without such reverence as the religious man has in religious belief. The culture of a nation is a reincarnation of the religion. Now I have privilege to introduce Professor Ashish Mohan Khokar sir, who is advisor to Culture Archive also. Our colleagues already introduced him, so I don't need to tell him because he's a great dance historian. Now I take the opportunity to introduce today's learned speaker, Professor Parul Mukherjee, Professor of Visual Art and Art History at the School of Art and Aesthetics, JNU. She holds a PhD from Oxford University, which entailed bringing out a critical edition of the Citrasutra of the Vishnu Dharmat Puran. It was published in 2001 by the IGNC and Motilal Banarsi Das under the Kalamul Sals series. She has a parallel research interest in modern and contemporary art and Asian arts. She has held fellowship at Clark Research Institute and the other so many scholarships, Heidelberg, Germany, South Asian Institute, and there are so many institutes. May I request, with the permission of the chair, to invite Professor Parul Mukherjee, Madam, to please deliver the prestigious Anand Kumar Memorial Lecture.
For me, it's a big honor to be invited to give this talk for Ananda Koomaraswamy Memorial Lecture, because I've had a very long-term association, interest in Ananda Coomaraswamy's works. And today I will be touching upon that. Next slide, please. As you can see, the title of my talk is Towards Decolonizing Indian Art History via the Problem of Mimesis in the Citrasutra. So I want to start with drawing your attention to this image. Let us stand before this image as before time. It's a detail from Ajanta frescoes, cave number 1. It belongs to circa 5th century CE. We have no idea about who the painter was, but we have before us visual evidence. The figure is animated, as you can see, on the account of the way he is depicted. It's a particular mode of representation. There's a use of color modulation, lines, in such a way, these two things come together, lines and color modulation, that we get a sense of apparent three-dimensionality. The artist has captured the facial expression of a figure in the act of speaking or maybe singing. There's another detail that has escaped many art historians. If you see it carefully, he has his mouth open and his eyes are focused on a possible listener. If you look at him closer, you see that his open mouth reveals 2 rows of teeth that are lining his upper and lower lips. An extraordinary detail for an image which otherwise gazes through elongated, stylized eyes, and his eyebrows are arched like a perfect bow. Has any art historian commented on the depiction of teeth in the mouths of painted figures on the walls of Ajanta? Not that I know of. Under what conditions can a new art historical object, and for me, this image is precisely that new art historical object, or a questioning emerge so late in the context of a well-known and documented as the paintings of Ajanta? It has been known for, more than a century. To answer this question, we need to turn to not only the discipline of art history and its inbuilt blindness, but also to the need to decolonize this discipline. The term decolonizing has become such a cliched phrase these days, and it's haunting many disciplines apart from art history. It has entered newspaper columns, editorials, and even everyday conversations. So when a term starts becoming so ubiquitous, it's everywhere, it's time to halt and think about its usefulness. Perhaps it's now time to not only state what one means by decolonizing disciplines, but also to state clearly what one excludes by the use of this term. Now, let me start with clarifying what I wish to exclude when I use the term decolonizing disciplines. It is not to affirm that all the disciplines that had their provenance in Europe had derived from some original matrix which was first conceived in ancient India. Not that I don't love my country more. It's not to propose that there was an ancient art history to be traced back to the Vedic times, and our job as an art historian is to simply uncover this fact and study Indic art history from this point in form of a teleological development and bring it to the present. If we wish to engage critically with the project of decolonizing art history, it serves our interest to acknowledge its Western origin and grasp the circumstances under which this discipline was first formed in Europe. And then to ask, under what conditions did it enter India? Obvious answer is colonialism. Colonialism is one of the defining conditions during which art history, like many other disciplines, traveled to our parts and institutions. Understanding these historical interconnections between art history and colonialism gives us a handle then to question how this discipline carries with it a value system inherited from the time of European Enlightenment. For example, the hierarchy between arts and crafts, aesthetics as the realm of subjectivity, and the primacy of naturalism or mimesis. I do realize that these terms are extremely slippery, and I hope to unpack the sense in which I'm taking them during the course of this lecture. The primacy of naturalism or mimesis as marker of fine arts. In fact, all these three are interconnected. So out of these three areas, I will focus on the last, naturalism or mimesis as a defining phenomenon of Western art alone and its claims to status of fine art. Such Eurocentric definition of art were at odds with Indian art theories, some of which professed deep interest in depicting the world as convincingly as to win the confidence, and the word for confidence is pratiti, to win the pratiti of the onlooker. Drawn from references from Shilpa Shastras and the texts on dramaturgy, I have identified a particular theory which I have called Anukritivad. However, at this point, we encounter a problem of translation. Is Indian Anukriti the same as Western mimesis? Not really. To grapple with this problem, I've had to coin a slightly awkward phrase, performative mimesis. So mimesis is not just between an object in the world and its depiction, but it involves materiality of art production and different cultural grids of looking. And I think Jacques Derrida puts it very, very aptly when he says, true mimesis is between two producing subjects and not just between two produced things. So it's not just a question of me drawing a horse here and saying that there's a mimesis between this horse and the horse that might be standing outside. But it's between two producing subjects. So far from being a timeless feature of Indian art, the theory of Anukaranvad had a certain history, an emergence, prevalence, decline, and possible reemergence. The conceptual nodes of this theory were scattered across many texts, like the Chitra Lakshana, Manasollasa, Shilparatna, etc. But its most detailed formulation is to be found in the Citrasutra, a text belonging to between 5th and 9th century CE, the same time when our opening image from Ajanta of the speaking figure was painted. In fact, it is these contentious issues around naturalism or mimesis that led me to work on the Citrasutra for my doctoral work, although at that time the term decolonizing was not in circulation. But in hindsight, my research involved critiquing the colonial bias against Indian art on the grounds that Indian artists or craftsmen lacked the wherewithal to capture naturalism in art. I wanted to address this lack itself as a productive terrain in comparative aesthetics and also to explore the Indic art theory. There is no dearth in the coinage of terms that seem to capture the Indic way of grasping naturalism. Take as, for instance, an array of terms or a family of terms that point towards a certain kind of mimesis. Sadrishyam, similarity or resemblance. Anukriti, well, imitation is not a good translation because if you go to its etymology, you could translate it closely as after the movement of, following the movement of. Satya, well, truthful. Anulomya, which is tricky because it has both a very metaphorical meaning and a literal meaning. Anulomya literally means that which follows the direction of natural hair growth. Vidha, which would mean something where you can capture the resemblance. When you show it to somebody, you say that you've caught it, you've really pierced it. That's a literal term, vidha. And these were words which were used in the context of portraiture, etc. Each of these terms presupposes a close correlationship between a model and its copy, which comes uncannily close to Western notions of mimesis. It is because of Anukaranvad's close proximity with Western art theory around naturalism that Coomaraswamy, one of the founding figures of Indian art history, found it suspect. His prime tool, Coomaraswamy's prime tool of defending Indian art from colonial denigration was cultural difference. Using polarities like Western naturalism versus Indian transcendentalism or spiritualism suited his aims, whereby he could very deftly disarm the Western critics from using naturalism as a weapon to show Indian art in a poor light. In a sense, at that moment, Coomaraswamy's defense of Indian art could be considered as a decolonizing move in art history, whereby to restore respectability, credibility to Indian art. It made sense then, when India was still a colony. But today, as part of a post-colonial nation, which has been independent since last more than 7 decades, do we have to perpetuate the Coomaraswamyan frameworks? In fact, already in the late 1980s, during my research on the Citrasutra, Coomaraswamy's use of even terms like east-west binary, etc., had begun to sound outdated, and I felt an urgent need to ask different questions. And let me also qualify that statement. It was my engagement with material which suggested different questions. Right? Now let us return to this opening image. It belongs to a Buddhist context. I have yet to come across a Buddhist Shilpa Shastra that codifies such a depiction. But there is a Shilpa Shastra that comes in handy, supplying the textual details. It is the Citrasutra of the Vishnu Dharmottara Purana. The text is Hindu, or specifically Vaishnavite, but its norms of image making do not relate to any specific sect or religion, except its Pratyama Lakshana section, which is really on icon making. The Citrasutra not only tells us about the bow-shaped eyebrows, Chapakara, eyes that resemble lotus petal, Padmapatra, but also speaks highly of paintings that resemble the world, Susadrishyam. And mind you, it's not Sadrishyam, Susadrishyam, which means something which resembles its referent very closely. Images that smile, or paintings that smile or laugh, Hasati Iva, or even speak to the spectators, Lapati Iva, have the ability to embrace them, Stishati Iva. So let me read this verse together. Lapati Iva Bhulambo, Slishati Eva Tatha Nripam, Hasati Eva Sadrishyam, Sajiva Eva Drishyate. But the criteria goes even higher because it says that's not enough. It should also have one more quality. Sashvasam Iva Yachitram Tachitram Subhalakshmanam. The painting should be able to breathe and make it clear that it's breathing to the onlooker. The model of the natural presupposed by the Citrasutra fell outside the Eurocentric or normative definitions of representation. Far from claiming that some pure Indic meaning had to be gleaned that had escaped my predecessors who had interpreted the same text, I would underline that a dialogue between the text's conceptual frameworks and those drawn from post-colonialism, post-structuralism, which are both critical of Western metaphysics, made my critical take on mimesis possible. If critical tools from contemporary theory were handy, so was critical historiography, germane to such a project. So out of the various interpreters of this text, it was Stella Kramrisch, the Austrian art historian, who brought Indic naturalism at the forefront of debates after her first English translation, which came out in 1924. Here I would like to add my observation that concerns decolonizing art history. It's a fallacy to think that only South Asians understand South Asian art authentically. Unlike the other colonial art historians, Kramrisch had a non-hierarchical understanding of naturalism. According to her, every culture had a unique mode of representing the world, and there are as many types of naturalisms as there are cultures. So if there's something called European naturalism, shouldn't there be a possibility of Chinese, Japanese, or Indian? Ironically, it is Coomaraswamy who may be considered to be more of a South Asian than Kramrisch. But it was actually Coomaraswamy who completely threw out Mimesis from his concerns, and it was for this reason that he singled out Adhyaya 41 out of the 9 Adhyayas, because this Adhyaya dealt with classification of paintings, and he felt that that was the best way in which he could radically reinterpret the text. And later on, it was in 1958 that a Sanskritist, Indologist, Priyabala Shah, brought out the first critical edition. And finally, in 1977, Shiv Ramamurthy again revived interest in this text when he brought out his book on the Citrasutra. Now, critical historiography made me aware of possible traps of decolonizing art history that I had to be careful about. If Kramrisch opened the possibility of Indic naturalism, her own student, Shiv Ramamurthy, pursued it more emphatically in a comparative mode, claiming that India was no different than the West in pursuit of naturalism. For every naturalistic term in European art history, he proposed a native term. So resemblance, he brought in Sadrishya, foreshortening, Shayavriddhi, shading, Vartana, and so on. Next slide, please. And apart from being an art historian, Shiv Ramamurthy was also an artist, and He's always used sketches in his articles. Here, this is from his article, which was about his journey through Sanskrit literature, and he was very enamored by verbal description of these famous heroines like, Kadambari, and then it would inspire him to make images of these main characters. So this is Kadambari, according to his imagination. As he writes, Kadambari has gone up the terrace of the palace to watch Chandrapida on the Trida Parvata, stands motionless with one hand on her waist, the other running after the loosely fluttering upper garment. And one can very easily discern Sri Ramamurthi's infatuation with European naturalism taught in colonial art schools. So, in fact, his sources were very authentically Indic, but certain models that he was drawing from, of course, followed neoclassical models of painting. It's okay, I just brought in these double slides to show how different the figure from the back, as shown by Sri Ramamurthy, and one of my favorite images from Ajanta. They follow different kind of representational logic. Next, please. Yeah, so in this particular illustration supplied by Sri Ramamurthy, he is also very self-conscious about his sources. And I don't know if you can read it. Yes, you can. It says, he actually tells us that he was inspired by Velázquez's Venus and Cupid. However, he had to Indianize his source image. So he says, of course, the figure must be draped before we institute comparison. The line of argument that Sri Ramamurthy followed came close to the one proposed by the earlier generation of comparative aestheticians like K.C. Pandey, who in a similar vein argued that for every keyword in Western aesthetics, one could juxtapose a term from Sanskrit aesthetics. So for imitation, he would say anukriti, catharsis, rasa, and so on. In fact, K.C. Pandey was a pioneer in comparative aesthetics. He was largely writing during the 1950s, and he had planned to write 3 volumes. First one was on Indian aesthetics. Next slide, please. The first one, as you can see, was on Indian aesthetics. A second one was Western aesthetics. And the last one, which was actually on comparative aesthetics, never saw the light of day. The reason being, according to me, that the field of comparative aesthetics was not sufficiently decolonized, as it was haunted by a defensiveness which I've tried to capture by the phrase, "we too have it syndrome." Perhaps it's possible to understand such a reaction, considering that post-coloniality at that time was still a recent experience. Situated today, after more than 7 decades of independence, if the impulse to decolonize has to remain relevant, it is vital to steer clear from earlier insecurities and to have a confidence to assert that not every move in Western art and aesthetics must match developments in the Indian context, either positively or negatively. Do we have to desperately look for Indian Michelangelos or Velázquez's? My own position is neither to claim that Indian art was fully proficient in naturalism in the manner of Sri Ramamurthy, nor to assert that we need to reject naturalism on grounds that it is seen as a marker of Western identity, a position adopted by Coomaraswamy. What if we resist direct comparisons between Western aesthetics and Indian aesthetics? A move to decolonize art history or aesthetics is not just to look for comparative terminology. What X is in Indian context is Y in Western context, but to locate some of the terms and concepts of mimesis within the larger Indian art theory and to see how they may be circulating within the larger context of literature, poetics, dramaturgy, etc. In the Vishnu Dharmotar Puran itself, there is an equation between painting and dancing. I'm sure many of you are aware. Yatha nrite tatha chitre, trailokya anukriti smrita. As in dance, so in painting, all the 3 worlds ought to be imitated. Do we discern any performative sense in the theory of mimesis? such that all the rules which are prescribed for dance are to be extended to painting. So we are dealing with a very different kind of mimesis. Our bodies imagined in a perpetual state of movement, which cannot be captured on a two-dimensional surface from a fixed point of view. So the possibility of artificial perspective, which was really invented in European art history, that too at a particular moment, 14th and 15th century, Italian Renaissance. So those questions were not of any importance. Movement and representation are seen as intertwined in the description of who the real skillful painter is. And they have a very interesting word for a skilled artist, Chitravid, Vidwan in painting. A Chitravid is someone who can show movement in a double sense. When objects are depicted in motion, like wind-swept clothes, banners, flags, these are not only to be depicted as caught in movement, but they are captured by the speedy execution of brushwork, which should be as fast as wind. So that's what I mean by double reference to movement. Not just the object which is being imitated, but the manner in which representation takes place. So demanding were the standards of defining a skillful painter, the one who knew how to paint or draw a sleeping body different from a dead body. In other words, a proficient painter had to capture not just the physical body, but its consciousness. The word used is chetana. And I don't mean it in any metaphysical way, but capturing chetana is understood in terms of the very process of art making through a deft handling of foreshortening. And the word used in the text is nim unnata vibhagam. You should know exactly when to make it look as if it's depressed and when it should look as if it's moving outwards. Direct comparisons between Indian and Western terms are not only misleading, but they make us doubt the veracity of the textual sources. It's a grand irony that it was Cramrish who had been the first one to translate the Citrasutra to underline the importance of Indic naturalism. She actually heard the text, ended up disavowing her own position after half a century when she wrote a foreword to Shivrama Murthy's book on the Citrasutra, where she says, well, the realism that Shivrama Murthy is talking about is in the eye of the beholder and the pious stories told, though not in the Citrasutra. So it was, the whole question of mimesis was actually, nudged into the realm of imagination. Cramrish, despite her close reading of this text, could not put aside a certain notions of mimesis that she must have drawn from Renaissance. If we return to the speaking head, can we move to the next one, please? We'll find it hard to dismiss the artist's intention to represent that which is matched by a kind of visual conventions. Yeah. We can never peek into the heads of the artists to know what they were thinking, but we can closely engage with the artistic labor and read the marks left behind and let this painting speak to us. We find that the evidence of Sadrishya is more legible in the iconographical minor figures than the images of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, where the filter of spiritualism is overwhelming. Or it has to be, because dealing with a theme of that kind. We may have to look beyond the Shilpa Shastras into artistic labor. Mark making by the artists. In this overlooked image, we can see the glimpses of overlooked theory of mimesis. And there are these different ways of showing volume, where, instead of showing, perhaps using cross-hatchings to show apparent, three-dimensional effect, there are ways of using lines in a particular way to emphasize the rotundity. And in fact, you find that bangles were a very important part of the visual technique of creating sense of roundness. And it reminds me of, the whole discussion on alankara in the theories around Sanskrit poetics, where this whole question of how do you look at alankara? Is it something which is something external, which can be detached from the body, like a bangle, or is it something which is a structural part of of poetry or painting, so that if you remove it, then something gets disturbed in the main structure. Did mimesis as theory and illusionism as an artistic device generate in the West alone? Was mimesis a figment of Indic imagination, or was it culturally self-conscious practice that also found articulation in art theory? To me, the speaking head is trying to speak about its own representation, that the discipline of art history is unwilling to listen. If we let the demands of our own time drown out the voice of the past, we lapse into the pitfalls of presentism, a form of kind of epistemic violence, I would say. Interpretation of precious texts from the past is indeed an important project for Indian art history. And here I would salute the IGNCA's Kalamula Shastra series, which it has been bringing out very important texts related with various disciplines. Coomaraswamy's interpretation of the Citrasutra teaches us a lesson about not harnessing a text to meet our own current needs and the salience of hearing a text. How can past be accepted as our significant other, as uncanny, as capable of surprising us? Finally, I would like to conclude with the quintessentially decolonizing question. Next slide, please. Can Indian art history have its art theory? My simple answer is yes, but not in any pure way. To grasp this native art theory, it was not enough for me to go straight to Nagnajit, the author of Chitra Lakshana, or to Citrasutra to catch the dialogue between, King Vajra and sage Markandeya, or to Bhatta Lolata, Shankuka, and so on. But my journeys to the past had to be punctuated with my dialogue with analytical philosopher Nelson Goodman, art historian E.H. Gombrich, philosopher Jacques Derrida, post-colonial theorist Homi Bhabha, and so on. Far from celebrating the restitution of a forgotten native art theory, I would argue for one's location in one's own time and the need to adopt a contemporary lens for a meaningful dialogue with the past. And finally, is it possible to read a native art theory in a non-nativist way? To me, here lies the challenge of decolonizing art history. Thank you.
Om Manglam Bhava. As a student of history, I think we went on a journey today where more questions have been raised, and you will now be forced to almost do a book at some point in time on the subject, because the knowledge pool is so vast, and this rewriting and this repositioning and this whole new approach to what is India in India today and what is how West has perceived it will need an examination, which is why I think organizations and institutions like IGNCA, which are multidisciplinary, have a critical role to play, and for which we are grateful, because this is one forum where the university, the cultural institutions, the bureaucracy, and the thinkers, the media can all merge and meet at one point. So a big hand for IGNCA, Dr. Sanjay Jha, Dr. Joshi, and the team who have actually even remembered Anandacoomaraswamy. His Dance of Shiva for us in the field of arts has remained a cult book. Of course, much quoted, much criticized often. So one wonders, after a point in time of 50 years, as a student of history who then teaches history and writes history, one wonders if history is good or bad, or it just is. After a point, history just is, because it's the prism with which one sees it. It is the point in time in history which one views it or reviews it. So it is quite a task, and quite an onerous one at that, for scholars, for academicians, for university researchers, teachers. I see a lot of enthusiastic students. And speaking of which, I would say, if any of you wish to learn dance, you go to a master. And the master says, what a good idea, please come. But do you know anything about painting? Because you must know something about line, you must know something about form. The student next goes to a painter, and the painter says, jolly good idea. But do you know anything about form, creating nothing out of space? Please go to a sculptor. So the journey continues. In the end, the student, very confused, like some of us are today, go to the musician and says, can you teach me music, because I need to learn this, I need to learn that in order to learn that. So the journey is never ending. Some of you are students here, I can see. Good luck to you, because you are in the best part of young India today. The burden and the responsibility for all history that has gone before us rests on you. I'm sure all of you at JNU and other universities are doing a splendid job of taking this whole movement forward. We can only thank that we are in a country where there's such choice, so much is happening, and with such abundance and openness. Thank you for being here. Thank you once again, Dr. Parul.